Read all about it. Parallel world discovered, fully equipped. Oh, hey, mister, here's your paper. Intelligent beings, mighty the works. Read all about it. Hey, lady, here, have a paper.
Imagine yourself alone on a tropical beach close to a native village, while the launch or dinghy which has brought you sails away out of sight. Surrounded by all your gear, you have nothing to do but to start at once on your ethnographic work. Imagine further that you are a beginner without previous experience, with nothing to guide you and no one to help you. This exactly describes my first initiation into fieldwork in Second Life. What I have just read is the opening passage to a book about the virtual world Second Life. What is striking about the passage is its obvious resemblance to the opening passage of the famous ethnography Argonauts of the Western Pacific by Bronislaw Malinowski, which more or less only differs with this single line. For the white man is temporarily absent, or else unable or unwilling to waste any of his time on you. In the end, Bulstroff's ethnography is about the culture of a place, and how humans have always been virtual. What makes virtual worlds real? Do people prefer realism or immersion? What's the difference? To answer this question, we need to briefly look at the history of virtual worlds. See, the term cyberspace was originally coined by Gibson in Neuromancer. Other fantasy works, such as those by Tolkien and the emergence of tabletop pen and paper games like Dungeons and Dragons, all had a prominent influence on the conception of virtual worlds, past and present. The first public virtual world, called MUD1, was developed by Bartle and Tropshaw in 1979. This text-based fantasy world allowed players to direct their text-based avatars through commands such as go and look around, which in turn allowed the world to be described to the player as they interacted with it. Another prominent virtual world, called Lamba MOO, was also text-based but allowed for users' input in their own surroundings. This in turn allowed for the creation of personal spaces like gardens and houses and so on. The first graphic virtual world was called Habitat and was published in 1986. Habitat was the first world to allow users to embody themselves through avatars, enabling them to see themselves moving about inside of the visual world. More recently, worlds such as Decentraland runs as a software cryptocurrency called Ethereum, which allows for users to buy and sell digital real estate while leaving the option to partake in various other activities like playing games and socializing within this virtual world. In Decentraland, users vote for policy changes and updates and hold an actual stake. Bulstroff explains that the term world is not just a metaphor in this context. They have place, space, embodiment, and objects. From that point on, most virtual worlds have followed a model that constitutes a few important elements: avatar creation and customization, task completion, and the proliferation of user-to-user and user-to-NPC interactions. Many virtual worlds, such as Second Life, do not have overt tasks or clear goals, and much of the onus is on the player to essentially construct a meaningful experience. The most popular virtual worlds, however, are those that fall into the broad category of MMORPG games, such as World of Warcraft. These virtual worlds are often considered more as online games than strictly virtual worlds given their design. In these game worlds, players repeat tasks, level their avatars, and accumulate better equipment by completing complex tasks with and without others in the world. Even though the player base for each of these virtual worlds differs, what is undeniably true of all is that they allow for anyone with an able computer and a stable internet connection to interact with the world and the other respective users through socialization, combat, or role-playing. This means that we are able to look at human behavior in virtual worlds to establish how people produce meaningful experiences. In late 2020, I spent a month conducting ethnographic research within a virtual world primarily focused on role-playing. In this role-playing world, there were strict rules as to what constitutes appropriate behavior and suggestions on how to become a better role-player. One's avatar or character did not level up and any accumulation of wealth was suggested to be done only if it fits the narrative of the character. One of my characters was a crude old mafia leader, engaging in all sorts of illegal activities. See, the accumulation of wealth was therefore appropriate given the overt roleplay goals of my character. The rules were strictly enforced, as I partook in and witnessed many rule disputes resulting in frustration, anger, and resolve. Out of my experience in these virtual worlds, and drawing from my other gaming experiences, I could not help but wonder how it can be that a world can be structured without an overt winning goal, without an endgame. What would players labor for? This obviously had me thinking, is it truly the endgame that players are working for, or is it the meaning that is produced working collaboratively towards any ludicrous goal? When speaking of virtual worlds and how reality intersects through them, one cannot avoid human agency. See, virtual worlds are particularly interesting to study because they have creators, who are more than likely visible, who communicate with participants in their worlds and at times change the world to better fit their needs.
It's a roleplay server, boys.
But
roleplay, not CSGO.
Virtual worlds possess a very specific infrastructure, and it could be said that they are made for a purpose. Moreover, they are made by people who have their own biases and their own ideas for what the world should look like and what it should be used for. If I burn my hands, I experience a very immediate and visceral sensation. My entire biology is shocked to its core, and my body reacts in a myriad of different ways. There is no labor that can recreate this exact sensation in virtual worlds, yet, nor do creators of virtual worlds seem to be particularly interested in recreating suffering, poverty, the aftermath of war and death, and all the things that people who have the privilege of enjoying virtual worlds do not usually experience in the physical world. See, virtual worlds are not games. Bolstroff asserts that thinking of them as games risks a conflation of online sociality with entertainment. Scholars who study virtual worlds assert that pure entertainment and fun are not the crux of virtual worlds. Instead, it rests somewhere in, for example, intimacy, community, and its political economy. Even though these categories do not make an immediate connotation to pleasure, entertainment, and fun, they still share a common feature of temporary enjoyment. See, how many enter a virtual world to experience a sense of severe human suffering? This comparison might seem stark and perhaps intellectually unfair. It's necessary to delve into because, see, at any point the sense of our immediate surrounding seems to supersede any virtual one. Some scholars are even arguing that digital technologies are now creating and shaping physical reality, calling it the ontological reversal. For how long have military drone operators been shaping the physical reality of other people on other sides of the world, and why are drone operators suffering from PTSD at similar rates as ground soldiers? What are the implications of treating virtual, digital, or game spaces as special places in time called the magic circle? On one hand, we are concerned if virtual worlds are treated as extraordinary and vacuumed. On the other, if they possess technologies that seamlessly simulate actual world sensories, our concern is awakened once more. See, I'm sure Meta has asked themselves, what makes the virtual world so compelling? How will we sell this? Well, I hope for them that their answer does not entirely rely on their ability to reproduce the real world or by simply adding luxuries to it. Dibble's famous piece, A Rape in Cyberspace, showed how a database can become a world in a virtual world and came with the powerful implication that a world does not need to look like our own for it to truly be of importance to us. See, in Dibble's piece, technologies emulating hyperrealism have not come to fruition, yet players still found ways to produce meaningful action and interaction with both the world and other players. I call this act of producing meaning in both crude and hyperreal virtual worlds doing culture, but we will get to that in a future video. Consider how players are able to distill entire game worlds to statistics, min-max numbers, and gear stats. At a high level, it's not frowned upon to turn down certain graphical settings to increase visibility in a high-octane situation, which would increase the chances of succeeding at the objective. Notice how immersion might not be contingent upon how many factors of the offline world the online world can simulate. This might seem obvious. For example, Meta wouldn't attempt to emulate real-life poverty or the aftermath of war and death, that they might enable it. Meta would much rather create an immersive realm that adds to our burdened physical existence by serving as a seamless extension into the internet. But this is not the prerogative of all virtual and game worlds. The initial wave of intellectuals such as Julian Dibble, who theorized computer-mediated communication, did so in a world without sensorially realistic virtual worlds. These thinkers realized very quickly the imaginative power of non-representational media and pondered the fate of human subjectivities lodged in spaces made of text. The rise of sensorially realistic virtual worlds, on the other hand, has made it easier for us to imagine virtual spaces as similar to actual ones. This, however, does not take away from our ability to produce meaning in these worlds. I do not believe that we are passive consumers. I believe with T.L. Taylor in that players are social laborers and act as central productive agents in game culture. As Sue Morris notes, while the concept of participatory media is familiar from his research into television communities, I would argue that these games are co-creative media. Neither developers nor players can be solely responsible for producing the final assemblage regarded as the game. It requires the input of both. Thomas and Brown argue that players in virtual worlds are neither authors nor readers, but they are themselves a new conceptual blend, both author and reader, both player and character, both virtual and physical. We are both characters and avatars interacting with other avatars, yet also players interacting with our own avatars. R. Seth writes, games are both object and process. They can't be read as a text or listened to as music. They must be played. Playing is an integral, not coincidental like the appreciative reader or listener. The creative involvement is a necessary ingredient in the uses of games. Players need to micromanage and engage with the world. Not just customization, but a demand for meaningful labor that produces meaning by making it. Lasting meaning is produced when the stakes are high or mundane, when a bet is on the table, when a sport team is about to lose,
I'm doing it!
and when you can't figure out if you should have one more beer with your friends. Meaning is not produced by simply emulating hyper-real sensorial qualities.